It's crystal clear there are CPAs and accountants who are ahead of the curve and those who are behind the curve. So you need to make sure you've got a CPA who's ahead of the curve, because if you were a client of that other firm that I was with and you couldn't get your R&D tax credit 2 or 3 years earlier, how much money were you leaving on the table? Hello there, Orthopreneurs, and welcome to another episode of your 5-Minute Friday. I'm your host, Dr. Glenn Krieger, and today I want to help you make more money. I want you to have more money. It's that simple. Because one of the most common questions that people ask on Orthopreneurs is, I'm looking for a CPA, or I'm looking for a financial manager. But a lot of times it's CPA. And I just want to hit here for a second and talk a little bit about CPAs. So when I was growing up, I remember one day, things changed in my family really quickly. Why did they change? Well, I later learned that my parents had found out with very little notice that they owed a significant amount of money to the IRS, that their CPA had miscalculated, and as a result, they owned huge sums of money. I myself once got a phone call from I've told this story before, I'll tell it again. I got a phone call from my CPA in Seattle when I was a restorative dentist back in 1997. I just owned my practice for its first year, I think it was 98 then, and my CPA had said to me, Glenn, great news. You did really well last year. Now, if you owned a business for a while, you know what that means. You don't jump up and down for joy at that moment. You jump up and down for joy when you deposit the check, but you don't jump up and down for joy when your CPA says to you, you had a great year. Because what followed was, you had a great year, and by the way, you have to write a check to the IRS for $62,000. That was on April 14th. I found that out. Now, that was back in the days where, again, I was in practice for a year. I didn't have $62,000 to pay the IRS. I called my banker. He said, come on down, sign some documents, and at a low rate, we'll give you $62,000 to go pay the IRS. And I did, and I recovered, and everything was fine. But you should never, ever find yourself in that situation. But what I'm talking to you about with CPAs is bare minimum stuff, right? Like the idea that you have financial planning, that you know ahead of time how much you're going to owe, I wouldn't even consider like bare minimum. Like if we want to call it that, that is like the bare minimum. You can't come to me and say, I've got a great CPA. They always tell me exactly what I'm going to owe, a year in advance, right? Chris Rock has this great joke about parenting. He says, somebody goes, I'm a great parent. I take care of my kids. Yeah, what do you want, a cookie? Like you take care of your kids. That's what we use as our guideline of when we're considering to be a great parent. You took care of your kids. There's a lot more to it. And for CPAs, there is a lot more than just financial planning and giving you an idea of how much money you're going to owe. What are you going to give them, a cookie? So what are some of the other things that we really look for, that I look for in my CPA, with whom I just did, my planning for next year? Number one, what do they know about tax code and tax law? What do they know about, and I'm going to use the word loopholes, because a loophole is kosher. It's legal. I'm not talking about trying to steal money from the IRS. I would never advocate that in a million years. But for me, I want my CPA to use every single thing at their disposal to save me money. And if it's legal, go for it. But I've been brought things that we've talked about that truly have never been discussed in any online group. Back in the day when I talked about R&D tax credits, I left my CPA financial planning firm. It was very public when I did it because I told them I wanted to do it, and they said, if you want to do the R&D tax credit, you're going to have somebody else sign off on your return. And ultimately, I found out 2 or 3 years later, they're suddenly now doing it for their clients. So it's crystal clear there are CPAs and accountants who are ahead of the curve and those who are behind the curve. So you need to make sure you've got a CPA who's ahead of the curve, because if you were a client of that other firm that I was with and you couldn't get your R&D tax credit 2 or 3 years earlier, how much money were you leaving on the table? And there's so many other things that my CPA, Trent Erickson, has talked about at Summit. You've heard him talk about economic opportunity zones, right? Conservation easements. He's had these conversations with you in front of 1,000 people at a stage, right? If you don't know what these things are, you should be asking your accountant. Now, they may not be appropriate for you, but ask them. And if they go, I don't recommend those. Why don't you recommend those? Well, you could be audited. And that was another story about my former CPA firm back in the day. The rumor was they hate to be audited. They'll do anything they can to avoid an audit. Well, my CPA will tell you, you don't want to be audited, but he doesn't fret audits at all. First of all, he's going to take care of it, not me. And number two, His name is on your return. Nobody's gonna do anything criminal, because if his name's on the return and it's criminal, he goes to jail. He doesn't want to go to jail. So he's going to push the envelope as far as he can to anything that he can defend legally. So you need to have a CPA who's really confident. So when you ask them, can I take this as a deduction? Absolutely. I can defend this quite easily. Now, that's the name of the game. That's more than just tax planning. So when you're looking for a CPA, it's the beginning of the year. Hopefully you've got your 2024 data all put together and you're getting ready to understand what you're going to pay or what you're going to get back. At the end of the day, you need to have somebody who's going to bring to you things. There are things that I don't want to tell you about here because I'm not a financial advisor, but things that have been brought to me by my CPA that I just look at him and go, where did you learn this? And he reads and he learns and he's plugged into other people. And it's pretty amazing the stuff that's out there to utilize to reduce your tax burden that just, if you're not doing them, why not? So you'll never get a true understanding of what you can do to reduce your tax burden by asking an Orthopreneurs or any online group. You need to talk to a CPA who's really knowledgeable. And if you don't like the answers you get, talk to another CPA. And yes, I know your CPA is a really nice guy or a gal, sweet person. You love them to death. You've known them for 30 years. They did your parents' books. But are they the right CPA to save you money? Now, if you say, look, I don't mind paying more taxes than I need to every year because they're a nice person, you're a much, much more understanding human being than most orthodontists I know. So again, I encourage you to work hard to make the best living you can and to work hard to keep as much of that money as you possibly can. And if you want to learn some cool strategies at Orthopreneurs Summit in 2025 in Vegas, we've got a whole track dedicated just to how to keep more of the money you make and maybe even invest it in some wise ways. So that being said, I love each and every one of you. I hope to see you at Summit. Go to opsummit2025.com. And by the way, I don't ask this often, but if you like this podcast, if you've enjoyed the Orthopreneurs podcast, please do me a favor right now. It'll take you 10 seconds. Send a quick message to one of your ortho friends to say, hey, by the way, if you don't listen to this podcast, you should check it out. It would mean the world to me. So thanks so much. Wish you the best. And again, you work hard to make your money. You should be working just as hard to keep it. Have a great day.